Hello, everyone, and welcome to Slash Film Daily for September 11th, 2017. On today's show, we'll be diving into the news, talking about a 47 Meters Down sequel. You'll never guess the title. We'll talk about Colin Trevorrow's departure from Star Wars Episode 9. There's some new quotes running around the internet, and we want to talk about those. The first reviews for Seth MacFarlane's The Orville have hit the web, and we'll tell you if the show is good or not. Probably the latter. And is Rotten Tomatoes responsible for the terrible summer box office? And in the mailbag, we'll be talking about the greatest plot twists in movie history, and we'll recommend some more unknown movies with plot twists. This is Peter Sciretta, and with me on today's show are Slash Film writers Ben Pearson.
Hey, what's up?
And Hoai-Tran.
Hey, everyone.
Okay, before we get into the news, we're recording this on Friday. We're all ready for the weekend. HT, you're excited to see it this weekend.
I wouldn't say excited. I am anticipating it. I've been dragged by my friend to go see it this afternoon. Although I originally wanted to see it during the day, so I wouldn't have to emerge from the theater at night, surrounded by darkness and terror. So I have mentioned before that I'm pretty averse to horror films. I'm sorry, but I'm taking the plunge for this one. I'm trying to open myself up to new things. I've heard so many good things about it, so I'm gonna go see it. Bring a blanket with me, you know.
I think you'll dig it. I think you'll dig the coming of age stuff.
Yes.
Yeah, and Ben and I were not scared by it, but it seems like you have a lower tolerance of fear. So I'm interested to hear what you think of the movie. Ben,
I was scared by some things. I'm not trying to come off like a total badass here. There were some moments where I was the movie got me pretty good at a few different moments. So yeah, definitely bring that blanket, HT.
Okay, guys, let's jump into the news. 47 Meters Down, a movie that was never supposed to be released in theaters. It was supposed to be a direct-to-DVD movie, is now getting a sequel. Ben, you wrote the story for SlashFilm.com. What do we know?
Yeah, it's sort of crazy. This movie was made for $5.5 million and ended up making more than $53 million worldwide. The Weinstein Company, their genre arm, Dimension Films, was going to put this straight to video on demand last year. And then earlier this summer, 47 Meters Down was acquired by a company called Entertainment Studios, and they liked the movie enough to give it a theatrical release, and that ended up paying off really in a big way for them. So big enough to justify a sequel, apparently, which is naturally titled 48 Meters Down.
That one extra meter is deadly.
It's going to make all the difference. The original director, Johannes Roberts, is returning to direct 48 Meters Down. He is also co-writing the film with Ernest Riera, who co-wrote the first film with him. So it's basically the whole creative team is getting back together on that one. The sequel is going to relocate the action from Mexico to Brazil, and this one follows a group of girls looking for adventure in the coastal metropolis of Recife. Hoping to get off the well-worn tourist trail, they hear about some hidden underwater ruins, only to find that the turquoise waves of their secret Atlantis aren't completely uninhabited. So, yeah, more shark action. And even when 47 Meters Down came out, I was like, the shark attack movie genre is never going to go out of style. Like, this is a formula that people love ever since Jaws and maybe even before that. And it's surprising to me, frankly, that there aren't more shark attack movies every year. We had The Shallows a couple years ago, and I think that one sort of spurred this one on. But yeah, 48 Meters Down coming soon.
I really like The Shallows a lot. I'm surprised that film didn't get more play in film Twitter. You know, I think what's interesting is that in today's day and age where we know everything, we have the internet, there isn't much mystery. But when you get into that water, we don't know what's underneath the water. And I feel like that is like one of the few things on this planet that is still truly scary.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, the deep ocean harbors some of the scariest creatures that we couldn't even imagine being in deep space. So
only James Cameron knows what lies beneath.
Yes. HT, have you seen The Shallows?
I actually have seen The Shallows. I saw it in theaters, and I quite liked it too, surprisingly. It was just over the top, campy fun. Even though it didn't really start off as a camp film, it definitely became campy towards the end. And I just enjoyed it for what it was, which was Blake Lively in a bikini fighting a shark and hanging out with a seagull named Steven Seagal.
Yes. Okay, so also in the news is we're learning more and more about why Colin Trevorrow left Star Wars Episode 9. Vulture published a report basically saying he was fired, which is, I think, strange considering that they say it was an amicable split. HT, could you read some of these quotes for us?
Yes, earlier this week we heard that it was over creative differences that Colin Trevorrow left the project, but apparently he was fired over some attitude problems. So Vulture talked to some industry insiders, and there are some really colorful quotes in this article. Let me read the first one. During the making of Jurassic World, he focused a great deal of his creative energies on asserting his opinion. But because he had been personally hired by Spielberg, nobody could say, "You're fired." Once that film went through the roof and he chose to do Henry, he was unbearable. He had an egotistical point of view, and he was always asserting that. So he apparently became very egotistical, very assertive, as they said, and
unmanageable is one of the words.
Yes, yeah. He clashed apparently with Kathleen Kennedy, which is apparently the one thing that you don't want to do when you're working on a project with her. This is the last colorful quote. Speaking of the managing style of Kathleen Kennedy. There's one gatekeeper when it comes to Star Wars, and it's Kathleen Kennedy. This is a veteran movie producer who said this. If you rub Kathleen Kennedy the wrong way, in any way, you're out. You're done. A lot of these young new directors want to come in and say, I want to do this, I want to do that. A lot of these guys, Lord and Miller, Colin Trevorrow, got very rich very fast and believed a lot of their own hype. And they don't want to play by the rules. They want to do shit differently. And Kathleen Kennedy isn't going to fuck around with that.
I love that quote. This is definitely what I've heard about Kathleen Kennedy in the past is, if she wants things done one way and you're in a meeting with her and, the filmmaker is pushing back and you arrive on set, a good chance that, what the way she wanted it to be done, everybody's prepared to do. You know what I mean? It just happened. She makes things happen like that. And I think that's a good, powerful producer. I do think some of these quotes in here are maybe unfair to Colin Trevorrow, at least from what I've heard from behind the scenes people. I've talked to a bunch of people that have worked with him over the years on Jurassic World and other things. And none of them seem to have, they're all males, so I don't know.
Yeah. Colin
that.
Trevorrow hasn't been painting himself in a good light lately, with first this story and then also with the recent comments that he's made about being used as an example of white privilege when articles have been written about how there aren't as many female directors or female people behind the scenes. Yeah. So he is often kind of brought up in that regard because he hasn't spoken very well about it. So I actually admire Kathleen Kennedy a lot more reading these quotes. I think I really respect her for standing up for Star Wars like that.
Okay, so I think it's probably a little unfair to categorize Trevorrow as, an egomaniac or something, because when you think about it, all directors sort of have to have those sort of personality qualities, right, in order to lead such a massive production.
Actually, pause that for a second. To what you're saying, if this story, the whole internet hates Colin Trevorrow. I don't know why. If this story was about Quentin Tarantino making a film for Kathleen Kennedy, and you read this exact quotes of, him having this vision that he was fighting for, and the studio executive, pushed back, it'd be a whole different story. But because it's Colin Trevorrow, I feel like it's getting painted in a different light. But you go on.
Well, yeah, I was just, that part of these quotes sort of rubs me the wrong way, because I feel like that is applicable to literally every director in Hollywood, like anybody, you know, male or female alike, anybody has to have that sort of strong, outgoing, assertive, you know, arrogant almost personality in order to succeed in the business. So that part is the only thing that sort of rubs me the wrong way a little bit. But Peter, I'm interested in sort of what you think about how these creative differences even form within Lucasfilm, because it seems to me like in the early stages, when Kennedy is meeting with people like Lord and Miller and people like Colin Trevorrow, they would have conversations about what they want the end product to look like. And it's so strange to me that that they all seem to be on the same page when they get hired, and then slowly as things sort of, you know, unspool, there tends to be a huge gap that forms there. And why do you think that is, and how do you think that happens? I
mean, I can't speak to how it happens in Lucasfilm as a whole, but Colin Trevorrow was hired to direct Star Wars Episode 9 before I think Rian Johnson even directed Episode 8, right?
I believe that's correct.
Yes.
So from what I understand, this is not problems in the same sense as Lord and Miller, where it's kind of like their vision for the film and the tone and stuff. I think what they were battling over were the direction and where they want to take these characters. And I think when he came on board, you know, you're going off of what J.J. Abrams did, and you had no idea what Rian Johnson's going to do. So it's not like, I don't know. This is all assumptions on my part because right. I don't know what he wanted to do. But say, for instance, I mean, I'm making this a big for instance. This is not the case. But say, for instance, he wanted to, you know, have the final film redeem Kylo Ren, have him, you know, come back to the Jedi, and have Rey turn into a Sith. And she was hugely against that. I mean, that's something you could see that's a conflict that you cannot get past. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, but that's the thing is, like, I feel like those kinds of discussions, those broad story discussions would happen in those initial meetings, and she wouldn't even bring him on if she didn't agree with those kinds of things. I don't know. Maybe I'm just not familiar with the way that Lucasfilm works. Maybe they, like you're saying, maybe they hired him so early on in the process that they were just like, we like the stuff you've done. We think you have some potential. You know, you've pitched us like some super, super broad stuff, and we'll see what happens in a few months when we have a better idea of what Rian Johnson has going on. Then you can like continually pitch us and, you know, hone your thing with the story group, and maybe that's how it works there. I'm not entirely sure. That's the whole thing with this that sort of strikes me as odd with the whole with all these problems within Lucasfilm, is that it just seems like we don't hear about this stuff very often at other studios. So there must be some way of things work at Lucasfilm.
One problem I see, and not to prolong this, but one problem I see is Marvel has a grand plan. And sure, like, you know, the episodes, just like episodes of TV shows, the director goes in and, you know, does his own thing, but it fits to this grand plan. And I think when J.J. Abrams did Star Wars The Force Awakens, he should have had a grand plan, a treatment for the 3 films. But the more and more I talk to, you know, the people involved, it seems like J.J. Abrams wrote, you know, just like he wrote the pilot episode of Lost with Damon Lindelof,
and then left it off.
Yeah, I mean, like he didn't have this huge grand plan, and I think he was just creating the pilot episode. And I think the problem is when they brought in these other directors, they didn't have this plan of like, oh, here's what we want to do in these films. I mean, Marvel goes on these retreats, and like, you know, they're like, let's come up with this idea for Doctor Strange. We want to have this villain. We want to have, you know, and then Scott Derrickson comes on and like, how about we do this time travel sequence? Do you know what I mean? Like, it changes the film, but it's still fitting on what they want to do on that level. Right. So I think that's probably the problem, I think.
Yeah, a philosophical difference in the way things are done.
Yeah. And that goes to show you, giving more control to the filmmakers can lead to problems. So, yes, let's move on. The Orville, Seth MacFarlane's Star Trek-inspired show. The first reviews have hit the web. Ben, you're at this roundup on slashfilm.com. Is it good?
So it doesn't sound very good, sadly. I wouldn't go as far as to call myself a Seth MacFarlane apologist, but I feel like I like him a lot more than other people do, even though I didn't really care for Ted 2 that much, and I'm not crazy about A Million Ways to Die in the West. There's something about him that I don't find quite as repulsive as as a ton of people seem to. Maybe it's just he's, sort of a song and dance man at heart, and I sort of appreciate that aspect of his personality. But yeah, when I heard that he was making a Star Trek inspired show, I was like, oh, this is going to be a comedy sort of in the vein of Family Guy, but it's live action. It puts Seth MacFarlane, he's created the show. He's the star of it. It's putting him front and center. This is going to be like a funny thing, but it turns out that this show, at least according to a lot of these early reviews, is not actually a comedy, which is a strange thing. It's more of a drama with just like a few moments of humor sort of spattered throughout the whole thing. And it's weird because a lot of the marketing that Fox has done for this has been collecting a lot of those jokes and basically presenting this show as a comedy, which is throwing a lot of people off. I'm trying to look at, I rounded up a bunch of reviews here on the site, so you can read that at slashfilm.com, but I'll read a couple little sections from a couple of these. Dave Nemitz at TV Line says that, frankly, MacFarlane is way out of his depth here, not only as a dramatic actor, but also, not only as a dramatic writer, but also as an actor. After making a career as an irreverent smartass, it's near impossible to take him seriously as a dramatic leading man. So that doesn't really sound great. A lot of people have sort of dinged his acting talents, as it were, in this show. The writing for the female characters is not supposed to be very good, and yeah, weirdly, it's like just not that funny. And it's also an hour-long show, which is apparently way too long for a show that doesn't quite know what it wants to be yet. And to be fair, these people have only seen the first 3 episodes of the show. I should also mention that it premieres this Sunday night on Fox, I think at 8 o'clock. So if you want to check it out and tune in for yourself, that's when you can watch it. But, a lot of shows have some trouble in the very beginning. It took Parks and Rec like a full season to sort of really find their groove and sort of become the great show that it ended up being. But so maybe it's a little unfair to judge the show on only its first 3 episodes, but it does sound like this one is more sort of off the rails than many other shows just in its first 3 hours. I'm not hearing great things about the Orville, and you can read a ton of excerpts from other people's reviews and stuff on slashfilm.com.
Yeah, I just don't think I have any interest in seeing this. It just doesn't look good. The name of the show is just baffling, and
yeah,
also,
that's the name of like the their equivalent of the Enterprise, the starship that they're all on, and it looks so much like Star Trek. It's almost weird that the Roddenberry estate is not suing them to stop production of this thing, because it looks like, and a lot of the reviewers dinged it as like basically being Seth MacFarlane's version of cosplay, which is like a kind of a sick burn. But
wow.
But yeah, it's very, very, very close to the look of Star Trek, but otherwise not much.
I just assumed it was more of a spoof comedy, and that's how they were getting away with that. And Seth MacFarlane, I mean, I like his cartoon stuff. I don't understand why he wants to become a leading man. To me, it just seems like that's not where his talents lie. He doesn't have
Yeah, I think you're probably right. I think he's just probably been behind the scenes for, Family Guy started in like 99 or something. So it's been like 17, 18 years of him, slowly emerging and, raking in all this money, and probably people whispering in his ear and just telling him yes all the time. So maybe he's just convinced himself that America wants to see him, lead something, but I don't know if that's necessarily the case.
Okay, let's move on. HT wrote this mini feature on the site called "Is Rotten Tomatoes Responsible for a Terrible Summer Movie Box Office?" So HT, is it responsible?
So Hollywood just had one of its worst summer movie seasons at the box office in 20 years. We haven't had as few tickets sold this summer since 1992. And a lot of industry executives in Hollywood are pointing the finger at Rotten Tomatoes, the movie review aggregation site, which compiles all the movie reviews from around the web and traditional outlets, and composites it into a neat 100% scale score, with any movie above 60% having a fresh rating and anything below that having a rotten rating. So industry executives are blaming this scoring system for being a reductive way of critiquing and describing movies. And so they're saying that movies that have rotten scores are getting worse box office returns, which has kind of been the case this summer. We've seen flops of movies like The Mummy, which was intended to be the launch pad of the dark universe for Universal. And we've seen flops of usual stalwarts at the box office, like Pirates of the Caribbean or Transformers: The Last Night, which did somewhat well internationally, but did not do very well at the domestic box office. And Baywatch was also expected to be a huge success financially, but did not do very well because people just weren't interested in a Baywatch reboot. But the New York Times article that this is based off of spoke to some of the industry executives who say things like, "I think it's the destruction of our business." This was from Brett Ratner, who has directed X-Men: The Last Stand and illustrious movies like Movie 43. And the New York Times article goes on to say the sentiment is echoed almost daily in studio dining rooms all summer. Last month, a chief executive for a major movie company looked this reporter directly in the eye and declared flatly that his mission was to destroy the review aggregation site. So I do think that this summer has been worse for big tentpole movies and big blockbuster films, but Rotten Tomatoes is not directly responsible for this. There has been the rise of streaming sites like Netflix and Amazon and Hulu, which encourage people to stay at home and wait for movies to come out. Movie tickets are getting more and more expensive. And most importantly, these movies are bad.
Yeah, and I think the rise of social media, not that like it hasn't been, prevalent in the past few years, but like now more than ever, when a movie hits and there is bad buzz, it spreads like wildfire. And I don't think people are tweeting, "Oh, this movie has a 50% Rotten Tomato score." Right. It's your friends and family and people you follow saying bad things about the movie that they paid for and they were disappointed by.
Exactly. It's just as much about word of mouth as it is about the Rotten Tomatoes score, which can act as a good indicator of how well a movie will be received, but isn't the defining factor or, the hammer that will knock down a movie. Josh Spiegel at Slash Film wrote a really good article a couple months ago about how critics aren't out to get movies. They're not, the defining dominant force when it comes to how well a movie does at the box office. They want to see good movies do well just as much as anyone else and share that with their fans, with the fans of the movies. And I think fans and audiences are becoming more selective about the movies that they go to see, and they want to see good movies and they want to see bad movies. And it's good to know that good films that are well reviewed and that are well liked and have good word of mouth are doing well at the box office. We saw the success of Wonder Woman. We saw the success of Girls Trip. Even Baby Driver, which was a mid-budget film that didn't have any franchise connections or sequel connections, did really well at the box office. The Big Sick, for example, which was a big festival hit, but wasn't by any means a franchise or a big rom-com. It was very successful at the box office. So while we've had a really bad summer for box office receipts for big tent poles, we've seen some good ones for movies that deserve the money.
Yeah. I would say this, on the studio side of things, have you bought in tickets on Fandango recently?
I have.
If you go to Fandango bought Rotten Tomatoes in 2016, and sometime in the last year they started adding the tomato meter rating to the movie pages. Mm-hmm. So if I go to buy a ticket to Transformers The Last Night, I before I click buy, I see that horrible green splat in my face, which seems counterproductive for a company that's whole business model is trying to sell tickets. On the other hand, I don't think I see any place on the Fandango website that is like, let me see what is playing in theaters around me that is high on the tomato meter score.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? Like,
There's
I feel
no,
like, I feel
filter
like
for that.
Why isn't there? Why isn't there a page that's like, show me what is playing that's good? Yeah, I mean, like,
Right.
I don't know. So I feel like on that sense, there seems to these two companies, the merger of these two companies seems to be at odds. But I don't know, Ben. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Josh said it well in his piece, and HT has sort of reiterated it. It's all about just making good movies. Like, that's what will get people out. And, you know, there are so many factors holding people back from going to theaters. It's got to be good for people to want to go and spend their money on it these days. So it's you know, changing times, all that stuff. It just, I agree that that should be the main factor. I think it's like a weird scapegoat that the studios are just trying to, you know, pass the buck on to somebody else. I'm not sure about Fandango having like a go see this if it's good kind of thing, because, you know, there's like the studios themselves hold ownership over Rotten Tomatoes. So I'm sure there's some sort of talk back and forth between them and Fandango, which owns a lot of Rotten Tomatoes. So I'm not sure. Maybe the reason that kind of page that you're looking for isn't on Fandango is because the studios are trying to hold back, you know, even further, even more than what's already there. I'm not sure.
But you'd think the studios wouldn't want Fandango to have the Rotten Tomato score for a rotten movie on the ticket page.
Right. Yeah. And I'm wondering if that's just because they are trying to preserve some independence and, you know, establish themselves as like a legitimate kind of thing. It's a weird thing with any sort of involvement from the studios at all. It's you got to think that there's something going on behind the scenes where, you know, people don't want to rub things too far in the wrong direction. But we should
also mention the movie. We've said this on the podcast in the past, that the movie going experience has suffered in the last few years. You know, people are on their phones, they're making noise. AMC is now the fast food of movie chains. And it's like, you know, I almost would rather stay in my house, which is sad because I love movie theater so much. And I love going to the movie theater. But I feel like that is taking a toll on the movie-going public. And then on top of that, and we've mentioned this before, you know, a service like MoviePass comes along, which wants to let you see as many movies as you want for $9.99 a month. And big chains are against it. Like, it's just like, I don't know. It just seems, I don't know. It seems like this industry...
They're in flux.
Yeah, it reminds me of the music industry when Napster hit. It feels like they are not reacting to what the concerns of their customers are fast enough, and it sadly, it might end up like the music industry.
Yeah.
I do also want to mention that in regards to whether Rotten Tomatoes is the culprit or not, the U.S. box office returns, the box office returns of American movies are also suffering in China, which is supposedly the second biggest market for U.S. films. But movies like The Mummy and Transformers: The Last Night didn't do as well as expected in China because it seems like they're also having less interest for movies that seem like rehashes or are, you know, hollow reiterations of tired tropes.
And also China's seeing that there's a lot of money to be made here, and they're starting to make big budget films for the Chinese audiences, and the screens are getting taken up by those. There's less Hollywood movies going over there. So, there's a lot of factors. You can read HT's full article on slashfilm.com. It's definitely worth reading. Let's go into the mailbag, guys. Michelly from Brazil asks, in your opinion, what are the movies with the greatest plot twists? Since if my question is picked, I'm pretty sure titles such as The Others, Sixth Sense, and Seven will be mentioned. Could you recommend more unknown movies? Okay, so before we get into this question, and by the way, you can send your questions to the mailbox or mailbag at peter@slashfilm.com, and please leave your name and general geographic location in case we mention it on the air. Before we get into this is about plot spoilers. So, I think, Ben, you said it right. Like, even knowing that a plot spoiler is in a movie might be a spoiler for you.
Yeah, like the idea of, hearing that, oh, X movie has a cool plot twist. You're going to watch that movie differently if you've never seen it before. You're going to be waiting for it, right? And like that is a different kind of experience than you would have if you're just watching something fresh without knowing anything about it. So I would just recommend that if anybody is like super, super, super spoiler averse, maybe tune out now. But if you're, we're not going to give away any of the actual literal plot twists of the movies that we talk about, but we are going to mention movies that have plot twists in them. So if you're worried about, oh, I've got a bunch of things that I still need to see, and maybe they're going to mention one of them, and if that could maybe affect your viewing experience in some way, just take all that into account as we go forward in the next few minutes.
On top of that, though, a lot of the movies we're going to mention are older films or lesser seen films, so if you haven't seen them by now, here's some recommendations. That's what I look at it as. I'll start this off with a film called Primer, which I saw at the Sundance 2004 Sundance Film Festival. And I'm not sure it has necessarily a plot twist, but it has a ton of twists and turns that I've seen the film, I think, probably like 6-7 times at this point. And I still don't think I've wrapped my head around. And I don't think that spoils the film in any way. It's a time travel movie. They invent a time machine, and it is done in a very realistic, literal way, and it's. I've seen infographics online that try to explain the series of events, and it is very confusing. But if you like complicated movies, Primer. Have either of you seen Primer?
Yes, it's definitely a mind bender. I think I've seen it twice, and like you, I still can't fully grasp it. The infographics on this thing are way more complex than the typical ones that you see maybe for like Inception or something. Like if you think Inception is hard to follow, like Primer is going to blow your mind. So it's definitely worth seeing because it's a super, super low budget movie and a really great example of what you can do with a smart script and very little resources. So any up and coming filmmakers or aspiring filmmakers should definitely watch it and see sort of what's possible with a super tiny budget.
Yeah. HT, how about you?
I have not seen it yet.
What is your pick?
My first pick is Memento. So this is Christopher Nolan's first movie,
second
feature film. Yes, after Following, and this one is a twist that is not particularly a huge plot twist, but rather a twist of your perception, which is something that Nolan likes to do. It changes the way that you've been watching the beginning of the film up until then, and it's very effective and very compelling, and it definitely plays with your expectations of the protagonist and his motivations. So I won't go into anything other than that, but it's extremely well done, and it does it so well with the use of interlapping timelines that Memento does, because half of the film is told backwards while the other one is told through a series of just one scene of a phone call. And it's one of my favorite films, and because this plot twist is done so effectively, it never feels cheap or gimmicky.
Yeah,
for sure.
Memento's a great film. I remember when it was coming out on DVD, one of the marketing gimmicks was that you could watch the movie in chronological order through DVD branching technology. And I did that, and the movie is not quite as interesting in chronological order. Yes, Ben, what's your pick?
So I'm going to start it off with the 1973 movie The Sting. This is directed by George Roy Hill, and it stars Paul Newman and Robert Redford as basically a pair of con men. And I think a lot of con men movies would probably work well in this as an answer to this mailbag question. Peter, you recently talked about the Brothers Bloom on an episode of Slash Film Daily. That one I think would apply here as well. Any sort of even like Ocean's 11, like any sort of heist movie or a con kind of movie is typically good at setting things up and then sort of pulling the rug out from under you. Characters typically get conned, and then oftentimes the audience themselves will get conned too. So that's a fun little meta moment there. The Sting is one of the best ones, though. So if you haven't seen that one, I'm not going to really give away what happens. But again, a lot of twists and turns and an ending that you don't necessarily see coming.
I think a lot of us tend to focus on, big twists at the end of movies, but I think there are quite a few films that do it, in the middle. Like one of them, I think, is Gone Girl. David Fincher film starring Ben Affleck. His wife has been murdered, and he is thought to be the killer. Is he the killer? Is someone else the killer? What happened to his wife? That's the mystery at the core of this movie. And, something happens halfway through the movie that is unexpected and makes you, reevaluate everything that you have seen thus far. And I just love it. That's a movie that came out a couple years ago. I love another film I just want to mention for a half, that doesn't happen at the very end, plot twist, but a more recent film, Spider-Man Homecoming. What a great moment and scene, and I'm not going to go any further than that.
I know which one you're talking about.
Yeah.
That's such an awesome moment.
But let's move on to your next choice, HT.
So my next choice is The Usual Suspects, which is a great film about an unreliable narrator played by Kevin Spacey. And this is also one that has kind of been spoiled throughout the years, but it doesn't ruin your enjoyment of the film watching it, which I thought was incredibly well done in the film. So I think that the reliance on an unreliable narrator is one of the more effective ways of doing a plot twist, because it makes you not only distrust everything that's happening in front of you, but also distrust your own sort of instincts when you're watching this film.
We're definitely seeing that with Mr. Robot. I think is taking a huge cue from Usual Suspects. So if you're watching that, that's filled with twists because of because of the unreliable narrator. Ben, what's your next pick?
I'm going to go with M. Night Shyamalan's The Village, which you could talk about a lot of M. Night Shyamalan movies in this one, but I happen to think that The Village is one of his best films. Chris Evangelista actually wrote a really great article on slashfilm.com back in early August called The Unpopular Opinion. 13 years later, The Village stands as one of M. Night Shyamalan's best movies. I would recommend reading that because I agree with virtually every word that Chris writes in that piece. I think there's a lot going on in this film. It was sort of unfairly maligned, in my opinion, when it came out. I think Roger Ebert notoriously hated this movie, thought it was a joke. But I think there's a lot there. The story is really good. The acting is all great. And I don't want to give anything away because I feel like a lot of people probably just skipped this one because that was around the time when Shyamalan's career was sort of on a downslope.
Yeah. And
if anyone has not seen The Village, I would definitely recommend going and checking it out because I think there's a lot there that's worth digging into, and it might surprise you.
Yeah, Bryce Dallas Howard is fantastic in that movie. We'll link Chris's piece in the show notes if you're looking for that. Another film I wanted to mention, we've already mentioned, one Chris Nolan film so far. I'm going to mention another one, and that's The Prestige, starring Hugh Jackman and Christian Bale as feuding magicians. And this is an adaptation of a book, and it's, as you can imagine, magicians have secrets that they would go to in huge lengths to hide, and the secrets that are at the core of this movie are fascinating. Honestly, the first time I saw this movie, I was disappointed by the twists in this movie, but it has quickly, for some reason, become one of my favorite movies. I love magic, so it might take you a second viewing to get on board with some of the turns that it takes. But if you have never seen The Prestige, I highly recommend it.
So my next choice is Arrival, directed by Denis Villeneuve, and it was last year. It came out last year. It's a sci-fi film starring Amy Adams, and it is about an alien arrival, as the title says. And it's not a film that you would expect to have a twist, but it is one of the most gratifying and just, I don't want to use the word mind-blowing because I think it's overused so much, but it really was mind-blowing in the way that it played out, just because it wasn't presented as a movie that would have a twist. And when I was reading up on it, I don't think people especially emphasize that sort of change, that game change that you see halfway through the film. And again, it's one that is about a change of perception. There's something called the Kuleshov effect, which was coined by Alfred Hitchcock, and it's about how our perceptions shape what we expect of an image. And I think Arrival does a really excellent job of just making a feature film out of the Kuleshov effect, because throughout the film we see these flashbacks, and the way that they're presented and the way that we traditionally see flashbacks, they present a different image of the film than what you would expect. I won't go into any further than that, but it is just astonishing how well this film plays with the concept of time and the concept of memory and emotion, and I love that.
That's a fantastic choice. That was my favorite movie of last year, and it just
it
wrecked me. Oh, so good. So my next one is Old Boy, the 2003 movie by Park Chan-wook. I don't even know if I need to say anything, because this twist has probably been spoiled for people too. It was remade by Spike Lee, I think in like 2013 or something. If for some reason you are one of those people who have just, heard about people talking about Old Boy over the years, but have never actually sat down and read it, and if somehow you've not had anything spoiled for you, go watch this movie. It will screw with your mind in a major way, and man, it might mess you up. So Old Boy. This one, there's such power in the way that he constructs images, and the editing in this movie is insane. The story itself is about this guy who's imprisoned for 15 years without knowing who captured him or who put him in this room or why. And when he finally just gets out one day, it's all about him trying to discover the secrets behind what happened to him, what's going on. There is some crazy stuff that goes down in this film. So check out Old Boy if you haven't seen it.
Definitely agree. HT, what's the last film on your list?
Speaking of Hitchcock, as I was a little earlier, my last choice is Psycho, one of Hitchcock's most renowned films, and one of the films that's most known for its twist. And that twist is in the, again, shift in perception of who the protagonist is and where your focus of the story goes. And I think Hitchcock does so well with twists because he's been called the master of suspense for a reason. It may not be one of his best twists, but it definitely is one of his most memorable ones, and one that has gone down in history. Yeah. And I remember watching Psycho and knowing, the ending and who the villain was, but still being very shocked and surprised and taken along for the ride. And that's the mark of a well-made film, I think.
Probably one of my favorite twists from Hitchcock is Vertigo, which it's almost a Gone Girl like twist. It's interesting that you mentioned you knew the twist ahead of time. I think for a lot of people, with a lot of older movies, this tends to be the case. I went into Empire Strikes Back as a kid knowing, Luke, I am your father, whatever. And I feel like a lot of people know that going in. It's not something that they experience in the movie, but just when you're watching the movie, the emotion and the story, you get caught up in it. And even if you have been spoiled, I think it still plays out. Ben, you have a bunch of more films for us.
Yeah, just three more that I wanted to fire off real quick. I'll go in order of oldest to newest, I guess. So in 1974, there was a movie adaptation of Agatha Christie's Murder on the Orient Express, which is pretty good. They're doing a remake coming out soon. I recently read the novel for the first time, and I'd seen this 74 movie that has a terrific cast, like Lauren Bacall, Sean Connery, Vanessa Redgrave, Anthony Perkins, a ton of great people. So you might want to watch that one if you are looking forward to the new one and just can't wait for for Kenneth Branagh's new film. But yeah, it's about a detective on a train and there's a murder and it basically gets snowbound and they realize that the murderer is on the train and it's all about figuring out. It's like a classic sort of whodunit story. But this one changes up the formula a little bit in an interesting way, and I won't give away how the whole thing plays out. But yeah, it's a unique take on the whodunit sort of framework. 2004 Saw by James Wan is obviously a classic sort of crazy plot twist ending movie that you'll see on a ton of lists and stuff like that. But it's there for a reason. This is such a good movie, and I think the Saw franchise as a whole. I think Jacob Hall, Slash Films managing editor, has written at length about this. But the Saw franchise is one that I think is wildly undervalued. I think a lot of people look at it as nothing more than torture porn, but there's a ton of cool stuff there with the way that this franchise plays with chronology and stuff like that, and it all stems from the shocking ending of the first movie. So. The first movie holds up very well as a single film, but I think it also works really well as a launch pad for the stuff that came after.
I think a lot of people like to write off that series as torture porn. This film I saw at the Sundance Film Festival in 2004. I mean, it was a film good enough to show there, and I think the film and the twist hold up.
Yeah, definitely. And then the last one is Kill List. And this is one that I think a lot of people probably have not seen. It's a British movie from Ben Wheatley, who directed Free Fire earlier this year. This movie is one of the few films where I sat in the theater for, I think, probably 5 minutes, even after the credits rolled, in the dark, just like burned into my seat. Like I could not move. I was so shaken by what happens in this movie. And I don't want to say really much more than that. It's about a hitman and his partner who take on an assignment with the promise of a big payoff for taking on a new job, and things unspool and unravel from there. And this movie descends into madness of a level that you will not see coming, and I don't want to say anything else, but if you've not seen Kill List, it'll wreck you.
Yeah, this is the only film on that we've mentioned that I have not seen, so I'm going to add this to my watch list.
Peter, I have not seen it either.
You guys should. HT, it might be a little much because you're not crazy about horror movies.
Yeah,
and it definitely sort of dips into the horror genre, but I would love for both of you guys to watch this and let me know what you think about it, because I cannot think of another movie in the past decade that I have just been like shell shocked as much as I have with Kill List. So that's a high recommendation.
Okay, I'm adding it to my Letterboxd watch list right now. So submit questions to the mailbag. Send them to peter@slashfilm.com. Please mention your name and general geographic location in case we mention them on the air. You can read all the stories that we mentioned on today's show on slashfilm.com. Slash Film Daily is published every weekday, bringing you the most exciting news from the world of movies and television, as well as deeper dives into the great features from the site. You can subscribe to Slash Film Daily on iTunes, Google Play, Overcast, and all the popular podcast apps. And we are still experimenting, so if you have feedback, send it to peter@slashfilm.com. Please rate and review this podcast on iTunes and spread the word. You can find more of me at Slashfilm on Twitter. You can find HT at Hoai-Tran on Twitter. You can find Ben at Ben Piers on Twitter, and we'll see you tomorrow.